Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm going to jump right into answering more of your questions. Now, first of all, there's this one. I'm not actually going to answer this one today. I'm really sorry, but I wanted to say something about it to Sammy Queen 26. It's still in my inbox. I have not forgotten about it. I am going to answer it. These videos you've pointed me toward, I actually have seen them before. I watched them several years ago, and I really like them, but it's been a while. So in order to really be able to do this thoroughly, I need to rewatch them, and I just haven't had the time. I'm actually trying to finish up a fiction project that I think I will get through hopefully in the first part of this week. So after that, I can turn my attention to this. So I hope that I will be able to post this either late in the week or early next week. But I promise I haven't forgotten about it. I'm getting there. Just be patient with me, okay? Next one. Happy Halloween to you too. I hope everyone had a fun and safe Halloween. I had a good time for my Halloween. But yeah, thank you. Right back at you. I posted some Walking Dead Halloween edits. I hope you guys liked those. Actually, I got one that was funny. I have one that has a bunch of villains on it and says, "Here there be monsters," and someone asked where Negan was. And I thought that was funny because I'm pretty sure I made that like back in season 5. So that was before Negan. And yeah, maybe I need to make another one, you know. Okay, so let's get to our first actual question that I'm going to talk about. When I first watched one of your videos on YouTube, honestly, I thought you were crackers. You are not the first or the only, so it's okay. But the more I watched, I thought, hang on, there's something in this. This is interesting. I hope you're right, because I really liked, I think that's supposed to be Bethyl back in the day, but then she died, so I moved on. With what Norman recently said about changing the writers and the showrunner, a whole new crew, most of whom are French, I assume, I'm wondering where that leaves us with the symbolism and all the little things you'd have had to be deep in the writer's room on the flagship show to keep track of, if you see what I mean. Who's left to do all that? Gimple? Apparently he's not involved in season 2. Okay, so there's more to this ask, but let's stop there and let me talk about that. You see, I know that Norman talked about the different showrunner and crew working in France on season 1. I'm not sure if that's what you mean or if he said that they're changing everything again for season 2. I'm not sure. But here's the thing. It is true that they have a lot to keep track of symbolism-wise, and it's amazing the amount of detail that they can come up with and the way that they can tie things back to earlier things that most of us have forgotten about, right? So I see what you mean and where you're coming from this, but I think that Gimple has a way to do it. He's got a handle on it. I mean, he must, because they keep doing it, right? As someone who writes fiction and often writes complicated stories with lots of characters, I can tell you that you have to be intentional about keeping track of the details. So again, I don't know how he does it, but I would wager he has like a spreadsheet or something, you know, probably hundreds of pages of notes, but he keeps them organized somehow so that he can keep going back to them and using them to build stories and put the symbolism in and put the vibe in that he wants. In terms of the showrunner, I do not know that much about Zabel's past. I don't know if he worked on The Walking Dead before, but if Gimple was turning an entire spinoff over to him, especially one as important as Daryl Dixon, because Daryl's the most popular character on the show and the one that everybody was looking forward to most was this one, he has to have a lot of faith in this guy, that this guy can do it. So he's probably worked with him before or seen his work before, and so he knows he can do it. But I would also think that anyone that he turns an entire show over to like that, you know, Fear the Walking Dead, The World Beyond, anything like that, the symbolism has appeared in all of them. So I would assume that once they get that job, they do a deep dive with Gimple about all of the symbolism, what they need to include. He probably shows them, you know, whatever it is that he keeps track of it on his spreadsheet or his mind map or whatever it is, you know, and tells them exactly what needs to be put into each episode. I even believe that even though Gimple doesn't write the scripts for most of them, you'll see the writers listed on the episodes. I think that he very closely works with the writers and tells them what needs to be put into the episode. So he'll let them write it and kind of have free reign to, you know, create it the way they want. So it's like he's telling them what to put in it, and then they are weaving that into their narrative. And he's telling whoever's directing, you need to bring this out. We need to have this shot. You know, we need to have it look like this. So I just think that even though he doesn't do the day-to-day, he very closely works with the people who are doing the day-to-day to make sure that the symbolism is brought out and that we see the same themes over and over again. So that's why I'm not too worried about it. I mean, look at the first season of Daryl Dixon. There was more Beth symbolism in those handful of episodes than there have been in the last several seasons combined of the flagship show. I mean, there's always been symbolism for us to analyze, but I mean, they were like hitting us over the head with it in season 1. And so, again, even if they change showrunners, even if they change venues or countries or whatever the case may be, I'm not worried about it because Gimple's still in charge. And yeah, it's a good question, but I don't see the symbolism going anywhere. And we kind of have proof that it won't because it didn't for any of the other spinoffs, so I think we'll continue to see it, and that it's just a matter of Gimple's in charge and he will make sure that whatever he wants to have put into the series gets put into the series. Okay. So, let's go to the next part of your question. If you listen to some fans, the "Where's Daryl?" Do the writers know him at all? Did they watch the original show or just skim the cliff notes? LOL. The ones who think TWD Carol, the love story, is enough to sell the future of the whole franchise and make them oodles of money. If you take their view on board, there's no adults left in the room anymore, and this is all a surface level vanity project. Yeah. And see, that is why I think, wow, I could go a few different ways with that, because obviously I totally agree. I've heard people say before that they liked Daryl better in the first couple of seasons when he was honestly less mature. And I'm sure people will push back on me for that, but it's a matter of, he was more, more aggressive, I guess, and he would get in people's faces more, and they just liked him better that way. Now, I mean, okay, but at the same time, the reason he doesn't do that anymore is because he has matured a lot, and he's become a leader, and he's become a lot more like Rick. And so it's like, I get that you liked the energy of that, but we've actually seen character growth from him, and to go back to that would be to regress. So I think that's doing a disservice to his character to say that you liked that better. And Daryl, of course, he's a different person than he used to be, but that's because he's had a lot to change him. And I like him the way he is. I like to see his development and his character growth. And as I've said many times before, I don't think that he was necessarily worthy, and it's hard to explain that because I'm not throwing shade at all, like to say he was a terrible person. I mean, obviously, I've always loved Daryl, but he needed to grow spiritually in order to kind of be worthy of the relationship that he'll end up having with his soulmate. And I think he's finally there. So to send him back to what he used to be, again, it just from an archetypal sort of aspect, he needed to grow and he needed to get to a certain place in his development before he could find his soulmate. And now I think we're there. So yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think you're really hitting on the problem with other ships. Shipping tends to, I mean, obviously it's always a romantic thing, but it also does tend to be a very physical thing. And obviously there's nothing wrong with that. We totally want to see the physical side of Beth and Daryl's relationship as well. So, I'm not throwing shade at that at all. But at the same time, we need it to be deeper than that. And we need it to have the emotions as well and the spiritual growth as well. And that, honestly, is why the show is so popular and so in demand, and why it's so long lasting. Because even though people will say, oh, it got boring, or, oh, they're killing off too many characters, yada, yada. It is the spiritual growth of the characters that keeps the audience coming back. And the reason people leave a show is because, maybe because they're not interested anymore and they've just lost interest. But usually they've lost interest because they're no longer relating to the characters. And in a way that actually shows the maturity of the audience that you're talking about. If they cannot relate to these characters changing and growing because they've been through these massive emotional traumas that would leave most of us puddles of goo on the floor, then okay, then I guess it's time for them not to watch the show anymore. But that's what the writers are doing. They're showing them going through these massive traumas, and you cannot remain the same person after being through a trauma like that. And that's what we're seeing with Daryl. And yeah, the Carol love story, most of them, all they want is for Carol to be basically a female Rambo and for her and Daryl to have sex. And it's like, okay, well, you can fantasize about that all you want, but this show has about 30 levels deeper than that. And if you're not on board, then you're not on board, but that's what the show is about, So the reason that Beth and Daryl were so much just more compelling than that is because for them, it wasn't ever physical. It was them connecting on a deep, deep, deep emotional level and working through their traumas together. So they connected on kind of a soulmate level before the romance came into play. And then it did come into play in the episode alone. We saw it come into play, but it was not just, hey, you're hot, let's have sex. You know what I mean? It was so much deeper than that. And that's why we all loved it so much. So I 100% think you're right, and I agree. And you're hitting the nail on the head when it comes to why certain people don't like the show, but why it continues to be popular with audiences. And let's one more time mention the fact that Daryl Dixon's spinoff, the first season, had better ratings than any other season of the show and any other spinoff ever has. So when people say, oh, I liked him better in season 1, okay, well, you're kind of in the minority there because more people are watching the show than have ever watched it before, and they love Daryl. So you're welcome to your opinion, but you are not in the majority. Let's just put it that way. Okay, next paragraph. I'm not hating on them because I'd kind of like a couple of seasons of Beth and Daryl, the love story, but I know that's just not feasible financially, like you said. Shippers like to think the show only exists because of them, but I know the general audience would switch off fast if the writers only catered to us. Yes, that's true. Like if when Beth did come back, we'd have to see who she is now. How has her time away shaped her? It wouldn't be all about romance. Yeah, so, and I'm glad you said this because, so on the one hand, I remember, especially years ago, we used to get a lot of flack for talking so much about Beth. And people would say, well, yeah, but it's not all about her. You know, obviously, Rick's the main character in the show, and she's just a side character. So even if she were to come back, you know, it wouldn't be all about Beth. And that's true. And I understood where they were coming from. You know, we love Beth and Daryl. That's who we talk about the most. So it seems... I understand why it comes across that way, that we seem like we're saying that it's going to be all about her when she comes back. Now, I've never thought that it's going to be all about her. But again, it's just the aspect that I enjoy. So that's it's her arc and Daryl's arc that I talk about the most. But a couple of things. With all that said, that doesn't mean she's not going to be a pretty darn big part of the story. Okay. For one thing, let's go back to something that is said in Still, one of Beth's lines in Still when she and Daryl are fighting. She says, which is to us now a famous and iconic line, that when she says, I'm not Michonne, I'm not Carol, I'm not Maggie, but I made it. Now, you're talking about people taking things on a surface level versus a deeper level. And that's true of this line as well. On a surface level, it just seems like she's saying, look, I'm cooler than you think I am. I survived, even though I'm not as much of a badass as those other three ladies. But there's about 30 more levels deep in that line, right? It's not just that she's saying. I mean, she is in the moment because she's fighting with Daryl, but I believe that is the writers telling us what we can expect from the story moving forward. And it's one of the reasons that I've never given up on Beth coming back, because she just named the 4 main female characters in the show. Michonne, Carol, Maggie, and then they're lumping Beth in with them, okay? So these, and all of these ladies are one half of one of the power couples in the show, right? It's Michonne and Rick, it's Carol and Ezekiel, it's Maggie and Glenn, and now it's Beth and Daryl. These are the 4 main couples, the 4 main dynamics that the story was going to be built around moving forward from that moment. And that is, actually, it would have been Angela Kang who wrote that line because she wrote Still, but that is the writers telling us that. Now, granted, lots of stuff has happened, okay? For one thing, Ezekiel was not in the show yet, so we didn't know who Carol's significant other would be. But pretty quickly after that, within, well, I guess he showed up in season 7. So within 2.5 seasons of that, we finally got Carol's love interest. And that romance happened pretty quickly and right away. And it's been pretty, even though they've had problems where Carol has been a little waffly, it's been pretty, it's the 2 of them since then. Then you have Maggie and Glenn. You might argue that Glenn is not on the show anymore. That's true. About 2 seasons later, he died because Negan killed him. But Maggie is still a big character on the show, and I would argue that her and Glenn's relationship is still there, but it's now just being seen through the lens of Maggie's dynamic with Negan because he took Glenn from her. But their story, the Maggie and Glenn story, and the repercussions of what happened are still a huge driving force behind the show, right? Then, of course, you have Michonne and Rick. I don't think I have to tell anyone about them being a couple, and they've got a spinoff coming up, and she's going to go find him, and obviously, I don't think I need to talk about that much. And then the other couple is Beth and Daryl. Okay, so I'm just saying this to illustrate the fact that, yes, Beth has been gone from the show for a long time, but those of us who have been paying attention have always been able to see that she's still there, just unseen, and Daryl has never gotten over that. And so now if they're bringing him back around to finding her, then this dynamic has continued to shape the show since season 4. And it's not in an obvious way. It's not in a way that the writers have been really on the nose about. We don't hear her talked about very much, but the symbolism has been there. And in terms of Daryl's development, it's been there, right? So again, I'm just throwing it out there that she is going to be a big part of the show. And I think we will see a lot of her and Daryl's romance. It might not be just that, but we're still going to see it. And the final thing I'll say about it is that even in Daryl Dixon, they were more on the nose with it than even I thought they would be, okay? Because they're being very, very obvious about the fact that he is looking for his soulmate. And he might not know who that is. He does not think Beth is alive, but he's looking for that. He's looking for his happy ending. They had Judith saying that both at the end of the flagship show and in the first couple of seconds, we hear her voiceover. So we know that this series, the spinoff, is going to be about him finding his soulmate and his happy ending. And then, we have things like, it's mentioned so often. People are constantly asking him if he's married, if he has a wife, if he has kids. We had that really heartbreaking scene where Falou said something about all of us have someone waiting for us, and his head went down. I mean, they're beating us over the head with the fact that Daryl is looking for romantic love, okay? And that was just even way more on the nose than I thought it would be. And I love that because my point is that you're saying, we might not see that much romance, or it's not going to be just about that, but they're making it a big deal, okay, to find his soulmate. They're being very obvious that this is the path that he's on and the journey he's on, and whoever it ends up being, it's going to end with him finding his happy ending. So I would argue that we're probably going to see more than even what most of us expected. We're going to see a lot of it. We're going to see the romance, and it might be tangled up with a lot of other storylines that are going on, but we are going to see it. And if we've seen the romance with Dwight and Sherry, and we saw the romance with Maggie and Glenn, and we've seen the romance with Carol and Ezekiel, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of it with Rick and Michonne when their spinoff comes out, which I'm excited for, then of course we're going to see it with Daryl and Beth, because Daryl is, like I keep saying, the most popular character on the show, and he's the one that the most people are invested in and want to see him get his happy ending. And I've said this before too, most people don't even care that much in terms of the general audience, not the shippers, but in terms of the general audience, most people don't even care who it's with. They just want him to find happiness finally after all this time, because they care about him as a character and they want him to be happy. So they're like, we don't even care who it is. Just help, let him find somebody, let him find happiness. And so of course the writers are going to make that a big deal, and it's going to draw the audience to the show. Let's see, we've got just a little bit more here. I guess I'm asking if you're shifting expectations based on the shift in behind-the-scenes talent and what feels to me like a whole new vision for Daryl and the future of the show, if that includes Beth or not. She could feel like a very different person, which might not necessarily be a bad thing. I love all your insights on the show and how it works on screen and off. I know this is a bit of a ramble. I hope you get what I mean. Yeah, thank you. And I do get what you mean. Overall, think about it this way. We were told constantly before the Daryl Dixon spinoff started that it was completely different, that it had a completely different vibe to it, that it was a whole new, like you said, a whole new vision, a whole new, adventure for Daryl, that it was going to be. And I think that's why, speaking about it that way, I think that's probably why the shippers, a lot of them thought it would be like the Daryl and Carol, what did we call it? Honeymoon in the woods kind of show, you know what I mean? And it's because they kept saying that it was so different that way. And I don't think they meant that to be misleading. I think you could argue that they were right. It is a whole different vibe. It is very different than it was, because it's not at Alexandria with all these different people. I think the difference in vibe comes from the fact that it is all about Daryl, whereas before we always wanted it to be more about him, but there were a lot of characters going on, and so we could have whole episodes where we didn't see him. But this is his spinoff. Almost every single scene he is in, and it is completely his story. And then it's in France. It's not, in the States. And so you've got different languages and different cultures going on. But despite all of that, and despite there truly being a different vibe there, it's still The Walking Dead. It's still Daryl. He hasn't changed. And I personally loved the vibe. I loved everything about it. I loved the way they did it. And it didn't feel like it was such a different show that we didn't recognize it. So that's why when, way back when, the Carolers were saying it was going to be the, Daryl and Carol road trip show, I was just going, okay, guys, they're not going to make it like this cheesy, campy, like it's still going to be The Walking Dead. And what do you know, lo and behold, I was right, it was. So I think that we could probably apply that as an expectation to when Beth comes back. Of course, she's going to be a different person. Daryl's a different person. They're both going to be very different people than when they last saw each other. But it's still going to be the Beth we know and love, just like it's still the Daryl we know and love. And we're going to be able to see how all of their hardships and their past have shaped them so that they can come together and actually have a really beautiful soulmate romantic relationship. And so I think that's what the writers, especially Gimple and Kang, have been crafting all along. And that's what I'm looking forward to. So I'm not really shifting expectations. I think it will be what I've always thought it would be. And I don't know, I think I've kind of always known that it would be different when they come back, in that it's not going to be exactly the same vibe as it was in season 4 and season 5. But like you say, that's not a bad thing. I just think it's going to be where they are now. So, I mean, might we have people that say, I liked them better back in season 4? Yeah, maybe. We might have them say that, and that's fine. They can, it's a subjective thing. You can feel that way if you want, but just like in real life, people change over years and they grow and they become different people. And I think it will actually be a good thing for both their characters, because I also think this is key to why everybody, the writers and even Norman, would say about Daryl back in season 4, they would say if he had feelings for Beth, he didn't really understand them. And it's because he was too immature on a romantic level, because he'd never really had much in the way of relationships before. Now we've seen him have relationships, and yes, they were toxic, like the one with Leah, but he learned a lot from that. He learned what he wants and what he doesn't want. And he's had good relationships, even if they weren't romantic, with other people like Connie. And you know what I mean? It's just shown him. And Gimple, you guys, Gimple has told us this. This isn't just me conjecturing, okay? At one point, when the Leah thing was going on, somebody asked Gimple what was the logic of having Daryl have this relationship with Leah. And he said, well, that's growing up. That's just, becoming an adult and having a relationship. And obviously, it was never meant to be a long-term relationship. They ended up having him kill her because she was so toxic, and they knew that. The writers said right from the beginning, after Find Me aired, that there was an underlying toxicity to this relationship. So it was planned that way. But they wanted to show that he has matured in the sense that he has had relationships, and now he knows better, as we all do, what he actually wants in a soulmate relationship versus that, which was kind of his first foray into anything romantic, So anyway, the point is, I don't feel like I really need to adjust expectations, because this is exactly how I've always thought it would be. And then I've heard the writers say these things along the way, and I just can I've always been able to see where it's going. If anybody is thinking that it's going to be exactly what it was in season 4, then yes, you may need to adjust your expectations, because they're both going to be very different when they come back. But once again, that's not a bad thing. I think it's going to be fabulous. So I hope that answers all of your questions. Thank you so much for sending that in. And I do appreciate you listening and giving us your thoughts. All right. So I'm going to call it there for the day, and I will be back tomorrow. Everyone have a wonderful day.